Welcome to Brew Crime, the podcast where we drink brews, talk crime, conspiracies like the Stargate, or whatever catches our attention. This is Mike and my co-host.
JT.
I don't know why Stargate popped into my head, but it's such a good old show that I just.
Oh,
I mean, MacGyver was in it.
Man. Accurate. Accurate. So we're here for part 2 of Hometown Crimes part 2. So it's
Or part two.
part 2.
French for two.
And yeah, and we briefly covered the fact that I had done a crime from Richmond, Virginia. But I decided to go all the way home. And I was born in Youngstown, Ohio, and Youngstown is interesting. And we'll talk a little bit about Youngstown. And I know that it was surprising to you, and it's probably surprising to a chunk of people who hear this, but Youngstown used to be a huge mob town. And we'll talk more about that in a second, but learning about this stuff was crazy because a lot of it happened around when my parents were growing up in that area too.
That's wild.
So it's like, so I didn't spend a lot of time there, but my parents did. They grew up there. My grandparents grew up there on both sides. It's that way. And it's really fascinating to read some of these things. And in some places, I'll mention kind of like how I know that area because it is very close to home. Very close to home. So I don't have this brewery's beer on hand. However, there is a brewery within Youngstown, Ohio, called Penguin City Brewing Company, and which the reason why it's Penguin City is because Youngstown State University is there. It's one of the biggest pieces of employers in Youngstown, and their mascot's the penguin, so hence
Nice.
Penguin City. But I do love some of their beers. One of the first ones that's on here is their Goza the Neighborhood, which truly sounds yummy for summertime. They also have Pickled Dilly Pale Ale, Limoncello Lager, a Campfire Classic. They have their Penguin City beer, their Oktoberfest beer. They even have a hop water, which you and I had when we were in Denver,
Avery Brewing Company
which is a
in
mango
Denver.
lime.
Actually, not. It wasn't Denver. It was in just outside of Boulder, wasn't it? I think it was Boulder.
Yeah, just outside of Boulder. That's right. But this one's like a mango lime hop water, which sounds really
Ooh, that does sound good.
yummy. Anyway, so if you find yourself in Youngstown, why? But then also go to Penguin City Brewing, and they'll take care of you. This case tonight is called the Youngstown Tune-Up, and no, it's not an oil change in Ohio. And you'll find out why in a second.
Mm-hmm.
And as you guys know, when I get into a case that's either personal or close to home or anything like that, I tend to go overboard. Well, this is another one of those. But we'll try and make it reasonable. And hopefully, I've been able to arrange this in a way where it stays interesting the whole way through. Because truly, there's not one piece of mob/mafia history that is not fascinating to me.
Hell yeah.
So the rise, rule, and decline of the Youngstown mob is a crazy chapter in the history of organized crime in the United States. And as we mentioned, it's often overshadowed by more famous crime families in New York, Chicago, and Las Vegas. The Youngstown mob still played a crucial role in the criminal underworld, particularly in the Midwest. Youngstown, Ohio, had its strategic location between Cleveland and Pittsburgh, and it became the hotbed of mob activity, earning the nickname Crime Town USA.
It doesn't sound like a super exciting place to be, even between those two cities.
It was, and it's coming back, and we'll talk about that in a second. And why.
Yeah, 100%.
So let's talk a little bit more about Youngstown to give you some environmental context. Youngstown's situated in Mahoning County, and there's a small portion of it that actually extends into Trumbull County, and it lies along the Mahoning River, which played a crucial role in the city's industrial development. It was founded in 1796 by John Young, a surveyor. Well, he's a survivor, but a surveyor from New York.
How old was he?
Probably pretty middle-aged.
Yeah, yeah, probably not
Yeah.
so young.
So, Youngstown, very original.
Yeah.
It, it was incorporated as a city in 1867, and the discovery of coal and the development of the steel industry in the 19th century transformed Youngstown into a huge, huge industrial hub.
Yeah.
So during the late 19th and early 20th century, Youngstown was one of the largest steel producing centers in the United States. And the city's economy heavily dependent on that steel industry, which attracted thousands of immigrants, particularly from Italy, Eastern Europe, and Ireland. And this period saw a rapid population growth and the
Yeah.
development of a vibrant working class, community.
Kind of reminds me here with the
Um,
gold rush, you know, gold rush made British Columbia kind of
yeah.
what it is. It
Mhm.
started out with the fur trade and all that, but when the gold rush hit, boom.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's one of those things where, you get off at that point a boat, right? And New York is
Yeah.
there and it is overwhelming. And it's like, well, where can we go that's close? And I will say, relatively, Ohio is pretty close to New York.
Yeah.
So,
You'd have to immigrate there.
issue, right. Uh,
Immigrate.
the so in the 70s and 80s, there was a decline in the American steel industry. We're jumping a little bit ahead. I just want to give you the full Youngstown
Yeah.
history, but it hit Youngstown hard, and I mean hard. The closure of the mills, starting with what they call the infamous Black Monday in 1977. That is the day when Youngstown Sheet and Tube announced massive layoffs. They laid off 5,000 people immediately. That was it.
Damn. Was it
Done.
as bad as Gary, Indiana? I think that place doesn't exist anymore.
Gary does, but
Does it? Does it though? Does
uh,
it? Crime
yeah.
exists there still, but does the town exist?
Yeah, fair. So that led to widespread unemployment, population decline, economic hardship. And the city, since 1977, has struggled to recover. My dad was 17 when that happened, and my mom was 15. But the city struggled to recover from this industrial collapse. Efforts since then have been made to diversify the economy, revitalize the community. They are legitimately trying, and they are more optimistic than ever. One of the documentary I watched a documentary on this. It's kind of a homegrown documentary, but it's on YouTube, and it's called Youngstown Still Standing. It's fantastic. Don't expect like high production value, and I'm not saying that's bad. It's great for
Yeah.
what it is, and I think there's a lot of great stories there. But within the show notes, we will put a link to the YouTube video that is that documentary, because it's fascinating to listen to, especially with some of the people they were able to get to interview who are from Youngstown,
Mm,
and I'll talk about that in a second too. As of 2020, Youngstown had a population of approximately 60,000 people, making it one of the smaller cities in Ohio by population. Um,
absolutely.
it's a huge decline. There was a peak population of 170,000 in the mid 1900s. And it's a pretty diverse population. There's a significant number of African American. There's a significant African American population, Italian American, Eastern European, as you would expect that to be with the yeah. So in recent years, like I said, Youngstown's worked to diversify its economy. The city's focused on developing sectors like healthcare, education, manufacturing, entrepreneurship. They're pushing for that. Youngstown State University, like I mentioned, it's a huge role in the local economy, bringing in people. It's a huge employer as well. Despite that, right now, the median household income is significantly lower than national average, and the poverty rate is nearly 40% of the population.
That's rough.
Yeah. Despite its challenges, the downtown's undergone redevelopment, new businesses, restaurants, cultural venues opening. There's initiatives aimed at there's a lot that's going on. So, in terms of some of the famous people, a former professional boxer and World Boxing Association lightweight champion Ray Boom Boom Mancini was born and raised in Youngstown. That's right.
Boom
Ray.
Boom Mancini.
Yep.
Now, is that because of the punching, or is that you getting
Um,
down with the ladies?
I'm assuming it was the punching. I think his dad was a boxer too from Youngstown.
Okay. I'm just like
Youngstown
the boom
actually
boom.
Youngstown produces a lot of athletes. Um, but I mentioned him just because it's a pretty well-known name in the U.S.
Because of reasons.
Also from Youngstown, born and raised, yeah. Ed O'Neill, who's the actor known for Al Bundy on Married with Children and
Yeah.
Jay Pritchett in Modern Family.
Modern Family is one of my favorite sitcoms of all time. That show is just so wholesome and fun.
Mhm.
It's great. The characters are so awesome, but also
You,
so annoying.
you know,
They're
my
great.
my cousin, my cousin from Ohio, Connor, he actually worked on that show, and I think he had a hand in a couple of
No.
scripts. Yeah.
Oh, that's
Hmm.
so cool.
Isn't that cool? And you know what's really cool is that he knows Youngstown because his father was my grandfather's brother, and they grew up there. And so Ed O'Neill being on that show, there's a connection, right? And so that's kind of cool. That's so
We should get
cool.
your cousin on the show.
Connor, he might. I mean, I just have to reach out. He Ed O'Neill has some fantastic stories. They interviewed him for that documentary,
Oh,
so
cool.
totally fun to watch. Um, Also, Farmore, which is a discount drugstore chain founded by Michael I. Monis. What a name.
Yeah.
In Youngstown. It was a nationwide chain. Of course, then it collapsed because of one of the largest corporate frauds in U.S. history. Yay.
Oh, that happens too. Yeah. I was
Yep.
expecting Walmart to kill him or something.
Right. Jerry DePizzo, I think that's how you say his last name. He's the saxophonist for the rock band OAR. And I was surprised to learn that the Warner Brothers are from Youngstown.
Huh.
So Harry, Albert, Sam, and Jack settled in Youngstown in the mid 1890s, having immigrated from Poland, and their first Nickelodeon was in Youngstown, and that got them started, which is pretty sweet. All right.
What was the original Nickelodeon? Do you know?
Huh?
You said the first Nickelodeon was there.
Oh no,
What was the
yeah,
first?
yeah. Their first Nickelodeon was there. Wasn't the first one in Canada?
No, no. Nickelodeon didn't come to Canada for quite a while.
Oh
So it was
no,
just
no.
it was like the first studio or whatever, Nickelodeon.
You, you know what I mean when I say Nickelodeon, right?
Not a clue.
It is the precursor to the theater. They called them Nickelodeons.
Really?
Yes.
I have never heard that before.
Yes. So when I say
just
the
know
Warner
the kids'
Brothers
TV show.
Oh no. So when I say the Warner Brothers started in Youngstown, I really mean it because they had the theater, they would obtain the films, and they were like, well, why don't we just go to California and make them? I'm
Wow.
grossly
Oh, of
simplifying
course,
that,
of course. Guys, yeah.
but yeah. So
Was their sister Dot there? The Animaniacs.
God, that'd be great. Actually, is Gary Paulson from Youngstown? He might have been. I'd have to look that up. Do not quote me on it. Anyway, so what are we here for? We're here for the Youngstown mob. The Italian mafia,
Yes.
originally known as La Cosa Nostra in Italy, in Italy, has its roots in the 19th century in Sicily, where it began as a secretive organization to protect Sicilian landowners from oppressive rulers and bandits, which is
And
pretty cool.
then became the people that were the problem.
Over time, the mafia evolved into a powerful criminal syndicate that engaged in various illegal activities like extortion, smuggling, murder, while maintaining a strict code of silence, or omerta.
Omerta.
In the late
Sounds
19th,
gangster.
omerta. It does. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, a large wave of Italian immigrants began migrating to the U.S. They were looking for economic opportunities. They wanted to escape poverty, political unrest, and how's that going for you? And organized
mafia.
crime in Italy. Right, exactly. And among these immigrants, of course, were members of the mafia who brought the criminal traditions with them. So, oops, I guess. As they settled in major cities like New York, Chicago, New Orleans, they began to establish their own criminal networks, eventually evolving into what is now known as the American Mafia. These mafia organizations quickly adapted to their new environment, seizing control of illegal activities like bootlegging during Prohibition, gambling, extortion, labor racketeering. The American Mafia became deeply embedded in local communities, often leveraging connections within the Italian American population to protect their operations and expand their influence. What?
They're just living the American dream, aren't they?
As far as I'm concerned,
I mean, as far as I understand the American dream, that's basically what they're doing.
they
They're They're
What?
making their wealth off the
Listen,
backs of others.
listen, what are the American mafia but entrepreneurs with weapons? I just saying.
Right? Yeah. It's a small business.
I hope that the mafia that I know is still alive and well in Youngstown, just not as strong. I hope they heard that one part right there. What are they but entrepreneurs with guns?
Not the rest of it.
Please don't send an enforcer down here. Don't. It's not worth it.
You
So
live
the roots of
in
the Youngstown mob
DC,
can be
right?
yes, totally against what I said my hometown one before being in Richmond. Yes, DC all the way. Yeah.
Or maybe Florida. I don't know.
Yeah, it'd be great if I went from the Youngstown mob to the political mob. It just dude, you set that one up and I all right.
You stole
So
it.
yeah, right. So the Youngstown mob is traced back to the early 20th century, coinciding with the rise of organized crime across the U.S. The mob's rise in Youngstown was fueled by the city's booming steel industry, which attracted a large immigrant population, as said, particularly Italians, who brought with them a tradition of organized crime and a lot of names that ended in vowels. During the Prohibition era,
Nice.
it's not even in my script, but I was like, it just seems like it works there.
It
During the
does, yeah.
Prohibition era, 1920 to 33, Youngstown became a key hub for bootlegging and illegal gambling, and these illicit activities laid the groundwork for the mob's rise in the city. Now, you and I, we've talked about Prohibition in the past.
Absolutely.
On my end, particularly the Man in the Green Hat episode, which, by the way, episode 77. See what I did? Go back. It's fun.
Nice. So then mine would be really
Yeah?
close to that. 76 or
I
78.
think we
probably.
were doing 2 cases an episode at that point. I think we were doing 2 cases
Oh,
an episode.
maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know. Go look. Find out for
It's
us. Let
either
us know.
okay, so it's either 77 or yeah, please, by all means.
Yeah, let us
Please inform us about our own schedule of shows. I don't
know. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
So
don't know.
Prohibition, catalyst for growth. The demand for illegal alcohol created opportunities for these enterprises to thrive. Local gangs and crime families, primarily Italian descent, began to establish their influence. Among the early figures in Youngstown's criminal underworld was Joseph Little Joey Naples, who would later become a key figure in the city's mob. I cannot tell you how excited I am to give you a very brief accounting of some of the key figures' names and just like a sentence or two of what they do, because some of the names are just like it can't be real. It just can't be real.
Exactly.
It's not possible.
Right.
All right, so little Joey had a big hand in the rise. Sandy Naples, born Charles Sandy Naples, son of little Joey, on November 4th, 1916, was a notorious figure in the world of organized crime, particularly in Youngstown, where he emerged as the head of the local mafia, and he was known for his ruthlessness, charm, and influence. Naples played a significant role in shaping the criminal underworld in Youngstown during the mid-1900s. Naples' parents, little Joey being one of them, Italian immigrants settled in Youngstown. The Naples family, like many other Italian American families at the time, became involved in the local underworld as Sandy's father, Joe, had connections that were crucial in Sandy's rise to power. And from a young age, Sandy was groomed to take on a leadership role within the family, and I think also, quote, in quotes, family, and the broader criminal organization. By the 1930s, the Youngstown mob had begun to take shape as a more organized and structured entity. And the mob in Youngstown was closely aligned with the larger Cleveland and Pittsburgh crime families, often serving as a bridge between the two. And these affiliations allowed the Youngstown mob to gain a huge amount of power and influence in the region. Sandy Naples' rise to power within the Youngstown Mafia was marked by a combination of strategic alliances, violent confrontations, and a keen understanding of the underworld he grew up in. Now, he didn't have a chance. I don't think Sandy had a chance of going legit. I don't think he had a choice either. By the 1940s, Sandy had established himself as a significant player in the city's mob scene, gaining control over various illegal activities, including gambling, loan sharking, and extortion. The 1940s marks the beginning of the zenith of the Youngstown mob's power and influence. During this period, the mob had a stranglehold on the city's political and economic life, and key figures in the mob exerted significant control over everything. And during this time, Youngstown was a city rife with corruption. The steel industry provided ample opportunities for the mob to infiltrate labor unions, extort money from both workers and employers. And Sandy, with his ruthless approach and connections to the, it's really funny. My grandmother's name is Sandra, and she goes by Sandy.
Nice.
Um, their approach and connections to the Cleveland and Pittsburgh crime families quickly capitalized on these opportunities. He was right in the middle, and it was perfect. One of Sandy's most significant early achievements was actually consolidating power within the Youngstown Mafia. Now, there were numerous violent power struggles between rival factions, but he was known for his willingness to use violence to achieve his goals, and he emerged victorious and solidified his position as the head. So a lot of
Absolutely.
fun. We'll get into it. As head of the Youngstown Mafia, Sandy oversaw a vast criminal enterprise that extended beyond the city's borders. His leadership style was characterized by a mix of charm and brutality. On one hand, he was known for his ability to forge alliances, maintain loyalty among his associates, and on the other hand, he was ruthless in dealing with rivals. You don't like me? Bring a Tommy gun.
Yep. That never happened.
Yeah, gambling was particularly lucrative venture for the mob. I mean, that was huge in Youngstown. Sandy controlled numerous illegal gambling dens and bookmarking operations throughout the city. Additionally, the mob's involvement in loan sharking provided another steady stream of income, and they preyed on individuals who were unable to obtain credit through legitimate means. And with the gambling, it was like, and this, you know what? This mindset is still there with like the lottery, which is like just one bet, one big win could turn their luck around, right? And they preyed on that because all these folks had lost their jobs. So Sandy's influence extended in the political sphere as well. Like many other mob bosses of his era, he understood the importance of having allies in positions of power. Through bribery, intimidation, strategic alliances, Sandy was able to ensure that the Youngstown Mafia operated with relative impunity. Local law enforcement and politicians often turned a blind eye to the mob's activities, either out of fear or because they were on the mob's payroll. And we'll talk more about one specific, or both. Yeah. We'll talk about one specific character in a little bit.
Probably mostly both.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong. So the Youngstown's mob had control over the labor unions, and that was one of their critical aspects of power. And that steel industry provided that fertile ground for the job to infiltrate. And so in terms of the influence of Sandy and others, who I'll mention right after what we're about to go through, because again, their names are just chef's kiss, they operated in a lot of locations. And we're going to talk just about a couple of those locations now, shall we? Of course, Youngstown, Ohio, right? In downtown Youngstown, that was the heart of the mafia's operations, where many illegal gambling dens, clubs, and bars were located. And I'll talk about one of the major ones before the close of this list. Briar Hill neighborhood was an Italian-American enclave and a key area for mafia activity. Mahoning Avenue was the hub for illegal gambling and the site of the infamous 1962 car bombing that killed Cadillac Charles Cavallero and his son. More on that later. Then southeast of Youngstown was Campbell, Ohio. And on the east side, it was known for industrial plants, steel mills. This area was heavily influenced by the mafia, particularly through the control of those labor unions. Then just south of Campbell was Struthers, Ohio. And in lower Struthers, it was a working class neighborhood, and they maintained a strong presence there. Then if we move from the south to the north, you hit Warren, Ohio, which happens to be where some of my family live currently. But downtown Warren was a key location for mafia operations, and the North Road area was known for mafia-owned businesses and the operation of illegal activities. Also, it's a road that I take regularly when traveling between my parents' and grandparents' house, and it's one that we took all the time to go to the mall. All the time.
Is that mall still alive?
Yeah, to a degree. Yeah, believe it or not. Actually, there was a story that went nationwide when one of those like kids trains ended up not being able to brake, and it ran straight through a storefront. So, yay!
I'm always amazed because most malls are dying, right? And we have one mall in the city of Surrey here that is always fucking busy, and I don't understand it. Like, I've gone there because there's a Lego store there. There's only two Lego stores in the province. So I went
Mhm.
in there and I got there like the store. I think the mall opened at 10:30, and I got there at 10:30, and somehow the food court was already full.
Wow.
And I'm
Oh,
just like,
well,
what the
malls usually
fuck?
open like an hour ahead of time so that walkers can walk, and then they'll
Yeah.
open the actual
But
stores.
it
Yeah,
just
yeah,
blew me
yeah.
away. It's like you got in there and I'm like, it's already packed and the store's just opened. Like,
It's
what the
wild, man.
fuck? And
It's
now there's a
wild.
Spencer's gift there where there wasn't when I was a kid.
I love Spencer's because the further you went back, the more sketchy it got.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I love it.
It was the best. Okay, so one of the last places that I'll kind of detail was Niles, Ohio. Well, guess what? My grandparents live there. My grandfather is a retired firefighter from Niles. He was an Irish firefighter from Niles, Ohio.
Niles, Ohio. Is Fraser Crane there too?
Ha! No, but it was the birthplace of William McKinley, one of the presidents.
Okay.
So
Not quite as
Park
cool.
Avenue and Robbins Avenue, uh, they were key streets where the mafia controlled bars, clubs, gambling establishments. I used to take Park Avenue to get to the pool in the summertime, and
Ooh.
Robbins Avenue was the main drag to get from Niles to McKinley Heights. And speaking of McKinley Heights, that was a residential area with several mafia connected figures living and operating. At a certain point during my mom's childhood, she was a waitress at her uncle's Italian restaurant. And I'm pretty sure there was more than just Italian food going on. That's all I'm gonna say about that.
Probably. I mean, shit. If you got an Italian restaurant in a place like that,
Yeah,
there's more going. Sort of like if you have a Harley Davidson motorcycle shop, there's more going on. It just is, right?
it's true. So again, you had Cleveland, Ohio, and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. What's really weird is as I was detailing these, Pittsburgh, two of the places were the Hill District and the Strip District. The District is where Mrs. Bruce Crime's father and his grandmother lived pretty much all their lives. And the
Oh,
Strip District is where Mrs. Bruce Crime and I went to eat after I proposed to her. Ta-da!
nice. Well, I mean, the strip district sounds more fun.
Yeah, right, right. Well, the strip,
But a bump.
it was very industrial, right? It was right by the river, the three rivers where they come together, and like Three Rivers Stadium for the Steelers and stuff is there and things like that.
And that sounds like
Um,
where the strip's gonna happen, if you know what I mean.
Probably a lot of wood being stripped.
Oh yes.
So, and the mob, this mob, the Youngstown mob actually extended into Detroit, Michigan, and Las Vegas, Nevada too.
Wow. That's
So,
big.
yeah. Now, one of the most well-known locations for the mob in Youngstown was the Jungle Inn, and it was located on the outskirts of Youngstown, Ohio, and it was a notorious gambling establishment during the early to mid 20th century. Its history is deeply, I cannot explain this enough, deeply intertwined with the rise of the organized crime in Mahoning Valley, particularly the Youngstown mob. The Jungle Inn originally opened in the 1920s, quickly became a popular spot for gambling. They drew a clientele that included locals, out of towners, and even some of the most notorious figures in organized crime. The establishment was known for high stakes games, luxurious environment, and its ability to operate outside the law, thanks in part to corrupt local officials who were either on the payroll or intimidated or both, as we've mentioned before. During the 30s and 40s, that's when the Jungle Inn became closely associated with the Youngstown mob. And that mob used the inn not only as a place to generate revenue, but also as a hub for their criminal activity, like bootlegging, loan sharking, money laundering. And yeah, and the Jungle Inn remained free from any interference for decades. It's now just a field. I wish they would have kept it up. It would have been cool as a historical site. Um, but it was firmly solidified as a mob controlled establishment because there were violent clashes between rival gangs, occasional police raids, which often resulted in minor fines or reopening of the business shortly thereafter. And that inn continued well into the 50s. Eventually, law enforcement started cracking down, though. And by the late 1950s, it ended up closing its doors. And so my assumption is that it closed its doors just like the year before my dad was born.
Wow.
So key figures in the mob. The fun times. Fat Cielo is one. He earned his nickname Fats due to his large, imposing stature, which matched his reputation. He was a tough and
Shouldn't he
influential
been
mobster.
shouldn't he been tiny or skinny then?
You know, you're right. That definitely would have been funnier, for sure. You got like Tiny, who's massive, and Fats, who's like the small. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Ernie Buendio was closely associated with the Pittsburgh crime family. In the mid 1990s, Buendio became embroiled in a power struggle with Lenny, Lenine, but he went by Lenny Strollo, who was a rival mobster. On June 3rd, 96, Ernie was assassinated in a meticulously planned ambush. By the way, there is a group of brothers in here. You're going to absolutely love one of the crimes that they did. Honestly,
Oh,
I guarantee it. Promise you, it is guaranteed to tickle your fancy.
crimes that I love. I'm intrigued.
We are not there yet, though. All I'm saying is they did the U.S. a service. Frank Camarada was a mobster heavily involved in the music and jukebox business in the 50s. That was a huge
Ooh,
way that they got revenue. Camarada's thugs used acid bombs, stink bombs, and fire bombings to get their points across.
Jesus,
Yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah, yeah.
crazy.
Um, Joe Catrone, it might be Catrone, but we're going to go with Catrone. Details about his specific activities and eventual fate are less documented compared to some of the others, but he was mostly tied to the Cleveland part of the family. Then you've got then you've got Tony Dope Del Santer. Tony
That's
Dope,
dope.
literally his his nickname is Tony Dope. Tony Dope. It's not like Tony quotes dope. It's Tony Dope.
Tony
But
Dope
his
probably
childhood
was
pal,
sober.
right, right, and really smart. His childhood pal Aladina Fradiano, who later rose to infamy as the mobster Jimmy the Weasel, were introduced to the inner workings of the Cleveland underworld at the local racetracks. Tony Dope would eventually handle the enforcement duties in Youngstown, eventually receiving his button in '63 after killing Mike Farah, a local gambler who, along with his brother, had fronted the Jungle Inn for Jack Licavoli and Frank Camarada. Now, for solving that problem for Jack, Tony was given exclusive rights to run the empire with a small within the small Ohio town of Warren. Then you've got Vince De Niro, not related to Robert. Vince De Niro was the Ohio Rackets boss. He was murdered. He was blown up in a car Monday, July 17th, 61, in the business district of Youngstown. You got Wolf DiCarlo in 45. He was from Buffalo. He was a racketeer. Joe the Wolf DiCarlo, who had been arrested 26 times, earned the title of public enemy number one in Buffalo, traveled to Youngstown
Damn.
to muscle in on the numbers racket there. Then you got Big Jim Falcone, I think Batman. At the dawn of the Prohibition era, a Sicilian immigrant known as Big Jim Falcone controlled rackets in the Tenderloin Vice District of Youngstown. Falcone's reign as underworld king came to a sudden end in April 21 murder when he was gunned down in a saloon.
I can't help but laugh when there's a Tenderloin district, because to me that sounds like probably there's some sex work going on because there's some tenderloins.
It's not wrong. So I mentioned Mike Farah earlier. He's known to authorities as the former part owner of the Jungle Inn in Liberty Township, just outside of Youngstown. He was 56. He was practicing his golf swing outside his Warren, Ohio home when gunshots from a gray green Chevrolet cut him down. Then there was Red Giordano. He was a go-between. Then you got Big Dom Malamo. Dom Malamo was made over in Italy in Reggio Calabria. Then he came to New York. Then he moved and settled in Youngstown. He was made, he was brought into the mafia by Joe Provasi. Big Dom and Paul Romeo ran the Calabrese organization for 50 years, and that was affiliated with Tony and Frank Milano of Cleveland. Milano was basically the liaison between Cleveland and Pittsburgh, and he did a lot of stuff in Youngstown. You've got Two Gun Jimmy Prado. Vincent Two Gun Jimmy Prado. Exactly. He was the local, he was from the Pittsburgh family. He attempted to establish a monopoly over gambling and extortion rackets in Youngstown, which is a territory that has historically been shared between the two families. That resulted in a mob war consisting of 12 murders that lasted between 78 and 81.
Oh, shit.
Right? Lenny Strollo was a former organized crime leader who faced 12 years in prison on federal and state charges, including racketeering and murder, and who stunned everybody because he broke the mafioso vow of secrecy and became a federal informant.
Ooh, bad man.
And he just died in 2021 at the age of 90.
Wow.
Yeah, right? let's see. Okay. So the Barber brothers. On March 24th, 1972, $30 million was taken from the safety deposit vaults of the United California Bank in Laguna Niguel, California, by a group of masked men. They were called the Dencio crew, and they had landed at LAX just a few days earlier. The $30 million was in dirty campaign money hidden by Richard Nixon in the bank.
Tricky Dick.
So,
Wow.
so they heard about this, and
Oh,
the
wait.
Youngstown.
Did you know? You know the Frank Herbert, the author of Dune,
Yes.
said that Richard Nixon was his favorite American politician because he taught Americans to not trust politicians.
I was wondering where you were going with that. I like how it ended. Um,
Yeah.
so so that $30 million was his. It was dirty. Youngstown gang heard about it, and they absolutely hated Nixon. That would convince them to do the robbery, and that included the Barber brothers. And ding, 30 million
Yeah.
gone.
You know what? Who else he said? He said his least favorite politician was JFK because you can never trust charismatic leaders. Exactly, right? It's actually a pretty good political thing, right?
You need like genuine charisma. You don't need like that fake bullshit charisma.
Yeah.
So the world of organized crime in Youngstown during Sandy Naples' reign involved no shortage of violence and power struggles. His tenure at the head of the Youngstown Mafia was no exception. He was involved in numerous violent confrontations, and one of the most notorious incidents involving Sandy Naples was the 1958 car bombing that killed his younger brother,
Oh, damn.
Billy Naples. Yeah, who was also deeply involved in the mob, of course.
Of
Now, the
course.
bombing was part of a broader conflict within the Youngstown Mafia as rival factions were going for control of the city's criminal enterprises.
One of those things.
Now, the death of Billy was a huge blow to Sandy, both personally and professionally. But despite the violence that surrounded him, he managed to maintain his position by tightening his grip and closing his circles. And then he ended up bringing them together. And he maintained power for several more decades. Now, the later years of Sandy Naples. What?
So damn.
Yeah. The later years of Sandy Naples' life were marked by a decline in his power and influence, mirroring the broader decline of the Youngstown Mafia. By the late 1960s and early 70s, increased law enforcement efforts, internal strife within the mob took a toll on his empire. Now, on August 20th, 1960, my dad was 8 months old. Sandy Naples met a violent end. He was assassinated outside his home in Youngstown, along with his girlfriend, Catherine Kitty Naples. Now,
Oh, wow.
same last name, no relation. Don't know.
Meow, meow.
Don't know. I feel like that's one of those moments where it's your girlfriend, and then you go to bed for the first time, and you both have the same family crest tattoo, and it's like, I didn't know. Shit. Well, it's too late now.
We're not related.
Right. So the hit was carried out by gunmen. They ambushed Sandy as he was getting into his car. Now, even by the standards of organized crime, it was a shocking event. That was a huge deal. So I do want to talk about kind of one of the other things that kind of led to the downfall of the mob too, and that was Cadillac Charles Cavallero. And this was also a car bombing. Now, if you haven't noticed, a Youngstown tune-up is a car bombing. November of 1962, Charles Cavallero, nicknamed Cadillac Charlie due to his penchant for luxury cars, was a well-known figure in the mob scene. He was born into an Italian-American family. He had risen through the ranks of the local mafia. He established himself as a key figure, and he was involved in various illegal operations, just like everybody else. But it made him both respected and feared. But no matter his high profile, he became a target in the power struggles. And the car bombing, on the evening of November 23rd, 1962, quite literally 11 minutes from where my family lives, Cavallero and his son, when I say local, it's local. Cavallero and his son Tommy entered their 1956 Lincoln parked outside their home. Unbeknownst to them, a powerful explosive device had been placed under the vehicle. As they started the car, the bomb detonated, instantly killing both Cavallero and his young son. This is not a son who's like in his late teens who's going through the this is a young kid.
Yeah.
The explosion was so intense that it not only destroyed the car, but it caused significant damage to nearby homes, shattering windows and sending debris flying through the neighborhood.
Wow.
And when I say child, he was 11. And
That's young.
this was particularly heinous to do. Say what you want about organized crime, but family is family. And
Yeah.
to hit a kid is not cool,
It's not cool, yeah.
bro. But it did kind of talk about the lengths in which mobsters were gonna go to eliminate their enemies,
Yeah.
right?
100%. What how far did you say again that it was from, was
11
it your
minutes.
11 minutes? It just reminds me there was a gang shooting about a 4-minute drive down the hill at a restaurant from my house a couple of years ago. And it's like, holy shit, that is too close.
Well,
It was
it's
on the
just
patio of a restaurant.
it's really hard to think that 2 years, almost 3 years after my father was born, right? This car bomb went off.
Yeah.
It's insane to think about. So they never figured out who did it because you got intimidation and all that other stuff, that happened. But in terms
And
of some of
no
the possible
snitching.
reasons, internal power struggles, retaliation for disloyalty, a warning to others, it could have been any of those things. Now, as I talked about, one of the key factors in the mob's dominance was its ability to corrupt public officials. Bribery, intimidation, outright violence were used. Judges, prosecutors, police officers were often in the mob's pocket. And the mob's influence in local politics can best be epitomized by figures like James Trafficant, who went by Jim Trafficant, who served as Mahoning County Sheriff and later as a U.S. Congressman.
You don't say that a U.S. congressman and stuff was a trafficker.
I
Ah,
I
second.
I want I want to send you a picture of Jim Trafficant. He is known for his ridiculous outfits, his pompadour haircut,
Oh God.
denim suit. I will put it right here in the chat.
Oh yeah, he looks like what I expected him to look like.
He looks like somebody in
Nice.
the pocket of the mob.
It looks like his haircut's trying to walk away on him.
Yep, sure did. Sure does. Sure
he
does.
has a tribble on his head, if you know Star Trek, with some sideburns.
Do you know what's really funny about what you just said? I don't know if you know this. The president of my university his last name was Tribble. Trible. And he had a comb over that it was just something else. So anyways,
and his hair reproduced elsewhere a lot. Dribble, right? It has to
Yeah,
reproduce
yeah.
a lot.
So he first was Mahoning County Sheriff, and he made headlines. This I was cool with, though. He refused to enforce foreclosure orders on unemployed homeowners, which pretty
Like
cool.
him.
It was a move that endeared him to many struggling residents. But his tenure as sheriff brought him into close contact with organized crime. In 1983, he was indicted on federal charges for accepting bribes from the Pittsburgh and Cleveland mafia families. The indictment alleged that Trafficant had taken $163,000 in bribes to protect organized crime interests, including illegal gambling operations, and to influence local law enforcement actions in favor of the mafia. Now, $163,000 then is just over $500,000 today.
Oh, you know what? I have no power, but if you want to bribe me, feel free, because it won't be legal because I have no power. Give me all your money.
That has been a PSA from Brew Crime. You're more than welcome to bribe us.
Yes, 100%.
We'll let you pick the cases every single week.
It's called patreon.com.
or I can just give you my PayPal account. It's fine.
It's true. Yeah.
So despite the charges, Trafficant decided to represent himself in court. Of
course.
Now here's the thing about Trafficant. This is where the charisma comes in. He admitted to accepting the money, but his reasoning was that he had conducted a personal sting operation against the mafia to expose corruption.
Oh my God. You know what? I don't like sheriffs that much, but I like this guy.
And he was acquitted of all charges. Wait for the next sentence.
I can't be mad. yet. I don't know. We'll see.
He was then elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in
Oh, fuck.
1984.
Oh, so okay, he's Republican.
Yeah. Well, no.
I'm just
Oddly enough,
kidding.
he was like, so I'll tell you in a second. So he served 9 terms until 2002. Now, he was known for being outspoken. He was eccentric, the pompadour hairstyle, denim suits, fiery speeches. He clashed with everyone. He clashed with Republicans. He clashed with Democrats. And he was known for populist stances. What I think was once he got in, based off of being popular for like the unpopular things, he just kept doing it because it worked. And it
Yeah,
got people focusing on him saying that he's fighting for them versus, and it distracted them from all the bullshit he was doing on the side.
absolutely. More
Now,
corruption.
he eventually, in 2002, could not escape them anymore, and he was convicted on federal charges of racketeering, bribery, tax evasion, and obstruction of justice.
Sounds about
Um,
right.
those charges stemmed from accusations that he had used his congressional office for personal gain, including accepting bribes, demanding kickbacks from staffers, and engaging in corrupt business dealings, not to mention his continued associations with crime
With
figures.
the mob.
In 2002, he actually served 7 years in prison. He was convicted and sent away for 8 years. He served 7 of the 8 years in prison, was released in 2009. He attempted a political comeback running for Congress again in 2010, lost miserably. Now, here's the funny part. He has a family farm, but every single year when I would drive from wherever we were to my dad's parents' house, right before I turned right onto my grandparents' road is one of the main roads in Poland, Ohio. And every single year I would pass by this house with this massive fence that would go around it. And when I say privacy, I mean like privacy and a half fence.
Yeah,
Turns out that's Jim Trafficant's house.
that's hilarious. You know what's
It's
funny?
ridiculous.
I looked him up right now, and he was a Democrat, but he almost always sided with the Republicans and voted against the Dems.
We have somebody
I
like
guess
that.
it's sort of.
Who's the West Virginia representative? I don't remember.
I have no
what his
idea.
name is. It doesn't matter. There's somebody like that today, actually.
Oh,
So
probably.
despite obvious ties to trafficking, car bombing, often seen as one of the turning points in the history of organized crime. While the mafia continued to operate in the city for years afterwards, the incident contributed to a gradual decline in power and influence. And eventually, the mafia's grip weakened. In addition to this, you had law enforcement crackdown because the FBI launched a series of investigations into dismantling this mob's operations. There were high-profile arrests and prosecutions of key mob figures, which was a big deal. There were internal betrayals and cooperation with authorities. And then there was the economic decline of Youngstown. There's no more money, right? So there's nothing that you can grab from people. So by the late 1990s, the Youngstown mob was a shadow of its former self. Many of its leaders were either dead or incarcerated, and the younger generation of criminals lacked the same level of organization and discipline. The mob's influence in the city had waned, no longer had the same sway over politics or business, and the final nail in the coffin for the Youngstown mob came in the form of federal indictments and convictions in the early 2000s. But the legacy is one of corruption, violence, and corrosive impact of organized crime on a community. And for much of the 20th century, the mob's presence in Youngstown was a defining feature for the city's identity.
Yeah,
And
sounds like it.
I mean, it was a formidable force, and it spanned from Pittsburgh to Cleveland and then some. And it's just a microcosm of a broader history of organized crime in the States, but it is a big one and it's lesser known. And there's not a lot written about it. There are one or two books. There's a podcast that's specifically about it. And I believe the son of one of the mafia members is one of the people who runs that podcast. But
Nice.
like I'll put it this way in terms of whether or not they're still around. If I ask my dad anything about it, he refuses to tell me anything because it was so dangerous back then that you didn't talk about it, right? You just didn't say anything. And
You don't talk about Bruno.
you don't talk about Bruno. Hey, that name ends in an O. Possible.
Exactly.
So, there was a time in which, so you might be dating somebody who is the daughter of one of them, right? And that happened to somebody that I know in that town.
Shit.
And they ended up going in. This was a time where you could walk in the door if you knew the family. They went around the back, walked into the back door, and they heard something about cement boots and taking out somebody. They turned around, walked right back out the door. They refused to tell me who it was. They refuse. They will not to this day. Even if all of my assumptions mean that that person's dead, they will not confirm. Not at all.
Probably smart, and also just fucking tell them.
The hold on that town is still real, and those families still are around. It's just not as organized.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of them that are now in government, local and otherwise. So Youngstown's so much. I know that I'm in Youngstown, where every single billboard I see ends in a vowel. It's just like, you're there. And it is the most Italian place in the world, which is wild that my grandfather, who's Irish, and my grandmother, who are Hungarian, they ended up there too. It's phenomenal. And the more I researched it and the more I realized, oh my God, I know that place. I know that place. I know that place. I know that place. It's something else. But
Yeah, for sure.
it's so much fun to know about. And I know that this is a long episode, but there was just so much cool stuff in it. So, mob, what are you gonna
I
do?
find it
Don't
I find it amazing. Like the American mob kind of is fizzled out. I know it's still there, but
Yeah,
it's not as powerful. I know the mob in Quebec, I think, is still pretty strong, which is wild.
that is
And I think it's wild
absolutely
too.
wild.
My mom grew up off a commercial drive in Vancouver in an extremely Italian neighborhood. And somehow there's, as far as I know, there's never been an Italian mob in BC. You just don't hear about it here, which is wild.
Yeah, I mean, or they're just really good at staying under.
But they don't,
Um,
like, you'd hear about rackets and stuff, and there just isn't rackets. So they're not here. It's
well,
just it's bizarre.
they're not into tennis.
Where I forget if Metro Vancouver is like the second largest or third largest city in Canada. Like you'd expect them to be here, and they're just not.
Yeah, I mean, especially with its close connection with the water, and also it's like real close to the States.
Well, we
So
definitely have trouble with a certain motorcycle gang. We also have a very big problem with a certain very large Asian organized crime network. Uh, it might have something to do with the Vancouver docks.
I weren't gonna say nothing, but
Drugs, money,
typically
all kinds of shit. Yeah,
that's what
but
it doesn't come from the borders, it comes from the docks.
it sure as
So
fuck does.
that's our issue here.
Organized crime meets organized crime. Always, it seems different groups of organized crime, and they work together to organize crime.
It works until it doesn't, especially when it's like a legit group and then organized crime, and it works together until it doesn't, and then the legit groups like, we got to go after them, and they
Yeah,
have the law behind them, right? So
exactly.
it's so I cannot tell you how worried I was that I was going to find a name in one of these articles or books or
Yeah.
whatever that I knew. So I honestly, I would love to sit down with my grandfather and be like, hey, tell me about this. And him being the hardened Irish fireman, he probably wouldn't give a shit and tell me everything. Um,
So
but
he's coming on the show then.
that would be a miracle. I would have to be there, and we'd have to remote record, but that would be a lot of fun.
How far is
So,
that from you?
from right here,
Yeah, where you
oh,
live.
it's like 7 hours.
That's
But
just
like,
a day drive.
I mean, but my parents live like 10 minutes away from them.
Oh,
Oh, and to give you context, Youngstown, Niles, Warren, all that's like 35 to 40 minutes from East Palestine.
oh,
Yep.
wow,
Yep.
wow.
So what a time. What a time to be alive in the 50s and 60s, man.
And
When
70s and 80s and 90s and
dude, and
2010s and
I only gave you a smattering of the car bombings.
yeah.
That was just very small selection. I just played the hits. Like,
Yeah, exactly.
uh,
Yep.
anyways,
Nice.
thanks everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to Brew Crime. You can find us on all social media platforms at Brew Crime. We have a Facebook group at Brew Crime the Group. If you'd like to support the show, head to patreon.com/brewcrime now. The money goes towards upgrading equipment and making the show that much better. You get one bonus episode a month, as well as ad-free access to our episodes. So shout out to our Patreon supporters. True Crime Nana, 3 beers in, and the faves of our lives. Bye.
I don't want to be a product of my environment. I want my environment to be a product of me.
Me. Nice. All cases on Brew Crime are written by Mike and JT or a writer we credit on the episode, and sources are put into our show notes for each episode. We always want to give credit to the people that research the cases we talk about. Check out our store at tpublic.com/stores/brew-crime-podcast, where you can purchase gear like t-shirts, phone cases, stickers, pillows, and all kinds of other cool stuff. Brew Crime's intro was created by Mike using Creative Commons Attribution licensed audio from purple-planet.com, soundbible.com, and freesoundeffects.com. Logo designed by Ben Greenberg. Thanks for listening to this episode of Brew Crime Podcast.
I'm Annie from Boston, Massachusetts.
And I'm Johanna from Vienna, Austria. We are the hosts of Fresh Hell, your international podcast that covers murder, mystery, and the macabre throughout history. Are you interested in the 3,569 ways your household could have killed you in the Victorian era?
Do you know how malaria and syphilis played a role in the John List family murders?
And have you ever wondered what Prince Albert's sex chair had to do with the murder of Stanford White? Okay, nothing. It had nothing to do with it. We're still telling you about it, though.
It's a pretty great sex chair. If you're looking for another show that talks about Ted Bundy, this is probably not the podcast for you. But if you're looking for two women that cover lesser-known cases from all over the world with a lot of background information.
So much background information that you will rock your local pub quiz from now on.
Then find Fresh Hell Podcast on your favorite podcast app.
We also have German cannibals.
See you soon.
Tschüss.
If you don't hear this, let me know.
Through a and controlled Pittsburgh, Ohio. You had Pittsburgh, Ohio. Biondillo, Ohio. He was the Ohio. Yeah, right. I will go ahead and skip down just a little bit here. Here it is. Empire. M2. That is a long link.
It is.
But hopefully that goes to it. Yeah, that'll go to it.
I don't want to be a Canadian idiot.
Weird Al says otherwise.
Exactly.